everybody, welcome back to Exponential Finance, the podcast covering finance, technology and innovation, from our home in Japan and beyond. This episode is our 100th overall, and concludes our second season. Thank you very much for your patronage. Kevin Shimota is a leading specialist in digital products and platforms, having been a senior executive at WeChat with over a decade of experience in the industry. His ongoing work includes understanding innovations and trends coming out of Asia and how they will impact and adapt to the global community. And now, please welcome Kevin Shimota, author of the first super app.
Welcome, Kevin. It's great to have you here. Fantastic book out there. It was a good read for anybody who's here now. If you haven't read it, enjoy the conversation, hopefully, and then you can still go back and have a deeper dive on the book. It's the first super app. It talks about WeChat and Tencent. So I thought maybe we'll start really at the back to ground everybody and share with us your definition of what the super app is and what it means in the WeChat context. And then we'll go back and unpack that as it evolved over time.
Absolutely. Norbert, first off, thanks for having me. So what is the definition of a super app? I start with a very simple kind of stupid definition. And that definition is it's an app that everyone is using to do everything. So that's my kind of throwaway definition because it's the one that makes the most sense and emotionally it makes sense. So you go, everyone's using it. So you have a lot of users and they're using it a lot. So you have not just quantity, but quality. So it's not like you have a billion users, but they only use it once a year. You know, that might be like some government app where you have to renew your car license every year. Then everyone's using it. They use it once a year. It's not really a super app, but everyone's using it. They're using it to do everything. So you have a full range of services. You have a lot of different verticals. You have retail. You have, just talking about government services. You have financial services. You have products. You have so many different things. You have games. A lot of different verticals, a lot of different types of services, food delivery, mobility, public transportation. So when you have this full range of all these different service types, that's when you really start looking at a super app. And then I think a common theme that I see, I try not to be too much of a super app snob because I think WeChat is maybe the only true super app. But I think that there are some that are super apps of their vertical, like Binance is trying really hard to be a super app of crypto. They actually hired a lot of people from Alipay, which is another super app in China. There are a lot of rising super apps. I kind of like to call them hyper apps. You have an app, you have a super app, and then maybe you have a hyper app in the middle. You don't have to go full super app because full super app is like WeChat is you've got 1.2 billion users and you can do everything on it. I think that there's tenets to learn from super apps. And one of the most common themes is platforms. Platforms and platform strategy. It's something we've seen for a long time in Silicon Valley. All the big Silicon Valley or Western or like US tech companies have it. Amazon connecting buyers and sellers. Apple, I guess, is with the apps and the smartphones is developers and users. Facebook is a platform, but it's interesting. It's mainly just connecting users with users. So that's an interesting one. You're not connecting two parties. That's called a one-sided platform. But all of these take advantage of platforms, and so does super apps. But what super apps does well is what we call multimodal, or I just kind of call them multi-platforms. You have a platforms to connect users with users. That's like WeChat has this, it has its own Facebook wall and messaging and connecting users. There's even peer-to-peer payments. That's, again, enabling more transactions between users. Then you have platforms that bring on other verticals. So you have this mini program or mini apps, which allows developers to kind of interact with users with mini games or developing their own kind of mini apps. Then you have retail that can retail and a lot of people that sell goods and services. You have business accounts. You also have mini programs can also be used by like Nike. They commonly use both, allowing them to interact with users. Then you have government services. So that's government interacting with users. So and then obviously FinTech, like you have loans. This is getting a lot more regulation now. This was in the Wild West days. I left WeChat 4 years ago. It was kind of everything was on there. Now they're probably slowly stripping things back to meet the new regulations. But you see what they're doing, so what's really important is in the past 2 years or so, as I kind of became this quote unquote super app expert, I'm contacted by these companies around the world that are trying to make super apps. And a lot of them just think, okay, bunch of services, payments into one thing, boom. But you have to be a little careful with that Because what you can end up with is kind of a pile of crap app. It's like a bank, they go, we want to make a super app. Then they take all the bank services, put into one, and they go, this is a super app. No, that's all of your bank services in one app. A super app is platforms. It's you're enabling other third parties to engage with your users or to engage with other people. So I think one important thing is maybe the definition of a platform, which I go by. So you have the definition of people kind of commonly use platform to mean software that's on the cloud. They go, I'm posting it to the Facebook platform, or like Google Translate. I'm just looking at Google Translate on my computer, but like they think of anything that is a service which comes from the internet, comes from a cloud as a platform. But the definition of a platform that I go by, platform strategy, is a medium which facilitates the interaction between participants. So platform is you have group A, you have group B. The platform allows them to interact. But then again, you have one-sided platform. You have group A, and that's all you have. The platform allows group A to interact better with group A. The good example is Dropbox. That's a one-sided platform. You have one group, which is users. They benefit from the presence of each other. Norbert has a file he wants to share to me, and we both have Dropbox. We benefit from both having it. It becomes more useful. I go, oh yeah, I use Dropbox. Okay, I'm going to shoot the link. Now you have the file. We're benefiting from both of us having it, and we just have the one group, users. Facebook really benefits from that. Everyone's chatting with each other, sharing to each other, all these different methods. So the platforms are bringing on parties and allowing them to engage one another. So you have them engaging themselves and engaging across. Amazon is, like we said earlier, it's buyers, it's sellers. A super app is something that brings in multiple platforms, bringing in WeChat's case, tens of millions of merchants, allowing them to interact with users. That's tens of millions of different goods and services, not just the 10 to 20 services that a bank offers and then tries to call it a super app. So that's my long-winded answer to your question of what is a super app.
Super, thank you. Great intro. Obviously, WeChat wasn't built in a day. This is a long journey, even still from the initial internet-based platform. There's obviously then a journey that Kevin did as well. And at some point, the WeChat journey and the Kevin journey intersected. So maybe a bit of personal stuff about yourself. What was the motivation? What was your interest in China in the first place? And then how did you get to WeChat and into WeChat to work there for a number of years?
As foreigners in China, we always have a China story. It's like, what brought you to China? Because it's hard to just stumble upon China. There's normally a pretty heavy barrier to entering China. But my China story is I learned Spanish first, and then I learned Mandarin because just a mathematics thing. It was a very utilitarian equation. I just go, there's 1.3 billion people that speak Mandarin. Well, if I learn that, I can speak to 1.3 billion people. If all humans are equal, then that's the one I got to learn after like Spanish and English. And then I went there for a year, and it was so different from my culture. I just found it incredibly fascinating. And the more I learned about China and Chinese, then the more it interested me, because the more I noticed how different it was from my own culture. So that's kind of what got me into China in the first place. And then this is a funny little personal note, is that when I was at the University of Washington in the States in Seattle, there was all these Chinese students right alongside me that were learning the same bachelor's as me, but my mother tongue is English and their mother tongue was Mandarin. And I'm just then going, how do you guys keep up with me? You guys have so many like disadvantages, and that's so impressive that you're learning the same things I am, but you've learned English as a second language. And I always kind of wanted to do the same thing. So I always wanted to do a master's in China and have that same kind of challenge that a lot of my Chinese friends had when I was in university. And then I wanted to work in a Chinese company, and getting into WeChat was the dream. So that's kind of my China story of why I went there. The next logical question is, how the heck did I get into Tencent, right? How did I get into WeChat? It's this giant company that very few people know about in the West. Maybe in Japan, people know a decent amount about it because it's kind of a heavyweight in Asia. But in the US, it's largely unheard of, even today, which is really surprising. The story's kind of lame, but it's the real story is always sometimes a little underwhelming. But I did my MBA in Shanghai at CEIBS. Previously, I'd worked at Boeing for 3 years. So I had a little bit of a brand in my resume, the Boeing that makes the airplanes. I did my MBA in Shanghai, and then there's a case competition that the MBA does every year that year, the sponsor was WeChat. And then I was a part of the organizing committee of students. I was with 9 Chinese students. The MBA is part foreign, part local Chinese. I was the foreigner that spoke Mandarin the best out of our cohort of MBA students. So I helped organize the event. And then the WeChat team did a roadshow in the US. They wanted to kind of get international presence. They wanted to go to Harvard. They just wanted to go to Harvard and Stanford and kind of say, we're WeChat and we're inviting you all to case competitions. And I think there's this brand equity thing when you're in marketing of just getting a picture of yourself next to Harvard, Stanford, these big, powerful brands. And they wanted to bring me along because they wanted someone that was American that could help them communicate, could help them present to the students, could connect with the students as well. So I went with them. We got along. They hired me on for an intern. Then I stayed on and then worked there for 2 years. And then the second half of those 2 years, I started leading the global team, a team of 5, not a big team, including me. It was our cool team.
Lovely serendipity. I mean, that's what we're missing when we can't meet in person anymore, right? So hopefully that's coming back to us. Now, Tencent and WeChat create so much awe and obviously very highly regarded. But if you wind back like 15, 17 years or so to the early days of the China internet, and I think that's not only a Tencent thing, but the accusation was always, everything that happens in the China internet is a copycat. And to be fair, right, it wasn't only China, the billionaires that have been minted in Germany by copying US business models and bringing them over. So China clearly being a late starter and also being a late starter in having PCs in households. So lots of that early internet, again, played out in internet cafes, etc. But the QQ, that was the internet version of the messenger, was a blatant copy of ICQ, right? And they got sued for that. The story really starts then when everything turns to mobile and you actually then come up with WeChat, which was also not necessarily a straight line. So share your perspective a bit on how that evolved and how we got to even the first iteration of WeChat.
That's kind of what the first part of my book is, which it was, for me, writing the book, I don't know if this sounds arrogant or anything, but it seemed like my book is just a big Wikipedia article. It's just a bunch of stuff that should be out there in public knowledge of how did China Tech happen? How did that progress from a few copies of Western companies to little bits of localization, to expanding on those little bits of localization, to creating their own business models that then go past what the West is doing in certain places and just become completely different. So how did all of that happen? Because there isn't a strong Wikipedia article that explains the progress of China Tech, that I needed to start with that. So I was born in 88. So when I was about 11 or 12, I got really into computer games, and I was using ICQ to chat with people online while playing computer games. So I was one of the few that used ICQ. Really impressive startup, really strong and solid messaging platform very early on, because AOL was kind of a mess and it was all organized around these chat rooms. So the story kind of varies. The 3 big ones are obviously Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. That's the big 3 tech behemoths of China. They all kind of start off as a bit of copies. Baidu copies Google. Alibaba copies eBay, and it really competes with them. And then Tencent copies ICQ, which is funny because a lot of people don't even know what ICQ is. And each of them have their own interesting stories of how they, like Alibaba, a guy that I've actually recently connected with, he worked there for 6 years from 2004 to 2010. He's made a documentary called Crocodile on the Yangtze, which he admits is a horrible name because it has nothing to do with Alibaba. And he's like regrets the name of that movie, but you could look it up, Crocodile on the Yangtze. It's Porter Arisman, really great film that kind of documents how Alibaba all played out. That film really captures well the progress of China Tech as well. There's barely any internet. The government's slowly allowing some. The American company Cisco is essentially building the infrastructure that is going to be China's internet in, the end of the 90s. And then China has the Golden Shield project that is going to allow them to have better control and have a harmonious internet. I always think it's funny because the West always speaks poorly of the Great Firewall of China, but we built it. The Americans built the Great Firewall of China, or at least a lot of Cisco did. That was my original undergraduate thesis. I got to plagiarize a little bit of my undergraduate thesis in this book. So that kind of is what originally happens. And then Alibaba wants to play a role in the creating of this internet. And he wants to go, Jack Ma goes, let's put businesses up on a website so that people internationally can buy it. Later on, it becomes an e-commerce platform competing with eBay. And then he just is able to localize and provide better customer support than eBay, and is just, I guess, able to hustle harder than the eBay folks. But I think it also just reflects how did China's internet happen, because it's a lot of localization. It's a lot more hands-on. Human capital is so much cheaper in China, especially 20 years ago. There was a lot more around customer support. Messaging was more important because businesses were just willing to hands-on engage other businesses and sell things, where America, like the US, just wants to have everything be platforms, no human interaction. So a lot of Chinese platforms you'll see is around chat triage. So even WeChat has a lot of chatting that they don't really lead to chat bots. They actually triage and they go, pick of these 7 services, which service you want. So let me give an example, because this is kind of becomes kind of a China specific thing that works in China and doesn't really work in the West. Is you open up your bank's business account on WeChat and you go, I want to do something. You message them, they'll go, here are the 8 different things you can do. It's kind of like when you call the business and they go, if you have an international bank account, press 1, credit card, or domestic, press 2, credit card 3, debit 4. But what you do is you just have that little list right in a chat box. And it's a lot easier to just see and select. And then you select what you want, and then they go, okay, international business account, what do you want to do? And you triage with these numbers. The West just went straight to chat bots. And I think this even reflects kind of a little bit of how China tech differs from the West. Is when chatbots were crazy in the US in 2015, 2016, I had just started at WeChat, and WeChat was totally not interested in chatbots. Because when you interact with a bank, for example, even something as complex as a bank, you go, okay, I'm an international bank account, number 1. I want to do a cross-border transaction, that's number 3. And then, yes, please connect me to person 2. You've just done 3 buttons. Now, a lot of times when you talk to a chatbot, you got to write out, I have an international bank account, and you write all of that out. You actually do like 50 to 70 interactions with your keypad trying to write all of that out. An even more simple example is like ordering a pizza. You go, I want to order a pizza. I live here. But if you're able to just select and pick things, it's so much easier. And China's just been more into this triage, and then sometimes they'll lead to a person rather than chatbots and trying to automate everything and turn everything into platforms. China has this kind of interesting connection between tech, but then it's okay to lead back to a human, where the US always wants everything to just be fully robotic, full tech. That just kind of plays into one kind of tenet that's different from the two. I think it has just been a long story of localization. QQ starts out as a copy of ICQ, but ICQ was just a chat app. Tencent quickly turns QQ into this entire crazy ecosystem. You have QQ, the messaging, then you have QQ Mail, you have QQ Games, you have it's QZone, Q Space. It's kind of like a Facebook wall, kind of like a bulletin board, but then all of it has a lot of avatar aspects where the QQ metaverse or QQverse feels very metaversey 20 years ago, and they even have QQ Coin to allow for online transactions, because Ponyma's first project actually comes from doing mobile payments for different banks and for different telecoms. He was basically trying to make it so that you can text someone with your phone to a phone number and then pay 5-10 cents. That was his original monetization method. Then he was actually able to bring money quickly onto the QQverse because you had something to buy. Kind of like how Skype originally was, where you would buy credit to call places. You could text places and pay money. So then you put credit on. Then he just started adding all these crazy things. Get bronze, get silver, get gold avatar, all of these gems. I was there in 2010, and the QQverse was kind of at its peak. In 2010, and I remember my Chinese friend had a 6-digit QQ account number, and he said he could sell it for like $15,000 because they were just, if you could get as low as 6 digits, that was a very sought after QQ account. And that's very metaversey because it was real estate. within that metaverse of QQ. I guess to kind of bring it back to just kind of how does China Tech all happen? It starts off with a copy of ICQ. ICQ was just a messaging app, just a great messaging app, but that's all it was. And then Pony Ma just goes, I want to make an ecosystem. I also have this ability to do some monetary transactions because I want to allow people to text phones. And it quickly, he brings in that coin aspect, that money aspect. And then he just starts bringing in all these crazy services and trying to make it a place where people hang out and chat with each other. And then we're also where businesses interact with people, because businesses are willing to chat with people, not just put things online. That's like the start of it all. And that's how it all leads down. This spirals out of control and then becomes its own internet monster.
And it was an internet monster, but then also the comet hit like it does once in a while when you become a dinosaur. And so we had this transition from the internet to the mobile web. And what I found so remarkable about this story is that in a normal evolution, you would have said, yeah, we've got a great team around QQ. They're just going to build a mobile version now. But this is not what happened. And you had an internal competition, and the team that had won was the team from Allen who had the prior email product. And so suddenly the next big thing, it's a brilliant case study of disintermediating yourself, right?
Absolutely.
I think for me, it's like the most remarkable part of the story and what it takes internally. You've got such a dominant product, and you actually have the foresight and the mental power internally to say, we're going to disrupt this and we'll build something even bigger, but it's going to be a different team.
It's a very big and risky play by Pony Ma in late 2010. He sees smartphone coming out. He sees its popularity growing. He's got 95% of social with Tencent's QQ ecosystem, just dominant in a way that just doesn't, that Facebook's dominant, but he just has all of these aspects, and he has businesses on there. He has the metaverse in 2010 on QQ in these weird ways. And despite that dominance, he sees smartphones coming, and he makes a decision. He goes, we are not going to be able to optimize QQ and the QQ verse in time to gain smart mobile phone share. It's too desktop based. What's a fun case study here actually is not just how did Tencent do it, where they go, we're not going to make it. So what they do is they go, let's do internal projects, multiple internal projects. Everyone just go for it. Everyone try to make, or like several projects, everyone try to make the best smartphone communication app you can make. And let's see who comes out on top. That's what Tencent does. Now you compare that to what Facebook did and what Zuckerberg did. He goes, we are closing Facebook for a month. No one, it was kind of this closed door for a month or two, is so the story goes. I don't know it that well. I know it from a few friends that know Facebook folk that were there at the time. He pretty much just closes Facebook, and he goes, we're doing a month-long sprint until we can turn our desktop-based web browser Facebook experience into a smartphone mobile web browser-based experience. An app experience that isn't just, this is the desktop web browser in an app form, and you're kind of just trying to move around what essentially is a desktop screen, but you're viewing it from a phone. But it's a mobile first. So what Facebook does is he goes, we can do this. Zuckerberg goes, we can do this, and he closes down, and then for a month, and then it's like a phoenix. It's reborn as a mobile first product. The Tencent one seems riskier, and it's kind of wild to allow your own product to cannibalize itself. It's WeChat's biggest competition is QQ. It's definitely, I think it's an intelligent thing, and it's a really smart way to kind of make sure every 10 years there's kind of a new tech cycle. Make sure you don't miss it because it's coming from your own company.
The benefit of the initial WeChat, which was pretty bare bones, right? You had your own page and you could send messages. And I think the big winner, of course, was that you could import your QQ contacts, so you could take your network with them, but nowhere near the WeChat that we know today. What appeared somewhere on the horizon in Hong Kong was this app called TalkBox, which allowed you this push to talk. And
right.
the origination of voice messages, that's where the two internets plays a big role because clearly the Talkbox company had some trouble penetrating into China because they didn't have the servers there. And so you got latency that wasn't quite acceptable. But that's probably the last big copycat move where
Right.
kind of the WeChat team said that is really what will bring the adoption. And when they actually implemented this on a Chinese domestic infrastructure with the great performance, that the adoption rates of WeChat took off and established itself. Is that, in your view, as pivotal a moment as I describe it from other sources?
I like how you say that's their last big copycat moment. I really agree with that. WeChat's definitely done some things where they're taking inspiration from other places and copy other places. And in the beginning, a lot of it is a copy of just other chat platforms. And Talkbox, they saw that feature and they go, wow, we need this. And they just grabbed it. They start iterating, and especially kind of official accounts, WeChat Moments. It's like the Facebook wall and then marrying it to a messaging app. It's kind of a copy of other social networking systems, like a Facebook wall, whatnot, but they really do it in their own way. So it's really hard to call that a copycat, and that's probably one of their first biggest innovations. We talk about super apps, and we talk about trying to have this app that does everything, that's super dominant, that can do any service that everyone's using. But actually, I think 70% of WeChat's value comes in that first year and a half during their big growth, getting 230 million users. And then they start gradually plugging in other stuff. To be fair, though, I should probably put it around like their first 50% of their value is there, because the more I've been talking about super apps and been talking to companies, looking at how companies could expand to become super apps that already have a lot of users, already have a really good quality of users, already have a bit of a platform, I realized just how hard it is to do that gradual addition of other services to become a super app. Because commonly what happens is you add in things too quickly, it kind of gets bloated, it gets confused, you lose users because they no longer get that core value proposition. They kind of go, oh, this thing's sold out. When you look at how WeChat did it, it all just seems like it makes a lot of sense. You go, okay, get a bunch of traffic, add on businesses, let them talk to each other, then start plugging in some services. But WeChat and Alan Zhang just did it so meticulously and so cleverly. It's really difficult to kind of explain just how well done that was. Because I'm talking to people at Facebook and Meta, and I have friends there, and they try to emulate it, but it's really difficult to pull off. And even when I try to think about how they should make a super app, how Facebook should make a super app, I actually start coming into walls. I'm like, they have so many different aspects going in so many different directions. They're so ad addicted. They're all about the user. It's kind of hard for them to move businesses in there in any kind of really coherent manner. It's difficult to think about. It's a very difficult process, although it seems, when you see it done well, like WeChat case, it just seems so easy, and it seems like to be like you just throw things in there. It has to be done in a very clever way. And as WeChat did it, it's very iterative. He was kind of, I'm like, when I say he, I'm talking about Alan Zhang, the founder, because in the end, he made like 98% of every decision, and he just gets the final call on everything. It's kind of a product dictatorship there with him. Yeah, a lot of what they do is they test. They just try to add in, they go, okay, can we add in mobility stuff? Can we add in DD rideshare? And then they add it in for maybe 1,000 users. They see if those users like it or dislike it. They kind of gauge the response, and then they pull back to add in. But they also are thinking a lot logically. Is that going to feel weird? Does that feel too off topic? So you originally asking me about Talkbox, but I guess I'm just trying to show that gradual iteration of this incredible kind of WeChat journey, where now you have thousands of features, thousands of services. I guess you have hundreds of functions and thousands, millions of services on there. And the thought that goes into what is allowed in. I've listened to Alan Zhang's. He's given about 8 public talks, all in Mandarin, and I've listened to all of them. And each time he talks for about 3 to 8 hours. So he's got like 30 hours of talks. He's really brilliant. He's very philosophical and kind of slow. He speaks really slowly. And he said something kind of interesting around 2017, 2018. They had released many programs, and then they hadn't done anything for a year or so. And he goes, a lot of you guys, he's like, you just being everyone in China, I guess, so like the Chinese tech world, are criticizing me for not having new innovations. He's like, but you don't know just how many times I say no a day. He goes, I say no to about 1,000 ideas a month. And I have to really carefully consider what is going to be a heck yes for the platform. And I think in the beginning, it's easier to kind of say yes to things. But once you get a giant, massive, successful app like WeChat, it is so difficult to say yes to any new functionality. Although they've added a lot of stuff that's more TikTok copying. So now they're copying from China.
We're always doing the comparison here in line a bit of Tencent WeChat on the one side and Facebook on the other. And I think what you've just described is this very customer-focused, customer journey-driven type of engineering is obviously very, very thoughtful with lots of no's thrown in, but always centered around how can we actually create more value so that people stay on the platform. They're not only coming on, they're all like all Chinese people are on WeChat, so they just need to stay basically. But the Facebook approach is so simplistic compared to that, right? It's like, okay, let's serve them 200 adverts, and that's how we're going to make money. I mean, it doesn't really take much intelligence to do that, and is the hell of annoying. And the reason I personally left Facebook and Instagram behind last year. Right. And so whatever the limit was, I think WeChat was like 5 per day or so. That's the maximum adverts you get. You probably spend 5 minutes on Facebook and you reach that limit. And I think that's also like a difference that we haven't really understood in the West when we're looking at the platform from a technical perspective, but the kind of the different approach in monetization, and it's essentially seeing Facebook as a single line of business, right? While WeChat is truly the platform as you described it. It's also a major difference here.
Going back to kind of earlier question again about the definition of a super app. I actually didn't originally write too much about super apps, or I wrote about mini programs and the advent of that and uniting that with mobile payments. But then I went online and I was looking at different definitions of super apps. And one definition, the most popular definition, the first Google search result was from Gojek, a really good, impressive rising super app in Indonesia. And it was on their blog, and they say the definition of a super app is an umbrella app with mini apps under it, period. So they go, if you are an app and you allow for mini apps on your app, then you're a super app. And I just really felt like that didn't connect with me, that I really disagreed with that, because you can set up a platform and say, hey, anybody, it's basically like setting up an app store within your app. You go, hey, people, come here and set up apps on my platform. But you could have no users. You could also have no developer. You could also have no content. Just setting up the infrastructure isn't enough. There's that. That's why I kind of say it's a lot of users and a lot of content. You also don't need to have mini apps. Mini apps is just one way to bring content for users to engage with, or for other businesses to engage with if you're going with B2B. In fact, I would argue that mini apps is not the way you should start, because that's a high barrier to development. That's a high barrier to entry, because the development costs. Actually, and like, for example, iPhone, genius. I really rarely see anyone discrediting iPhone's beginning journey. But if I was gonna really nitpick, I could say that the iPhone in the beginning, everyone was having to create an app. That was a pretty high barrier to entry. So when the iPhone first came out, for the first few years, I didn't really see the value, because people showed me, the only app I think I knew of was Bump. And it was, you bump your phones and then you add each other's phone number. It was one of the only apps, because there weren't enough users, and the barrier to entry to developers was really high. You had to know a lot about computing. You had to have a lot of developer background, then you'd have to go through the App Store's stringent review process. And they didn't even really have any users yet. So how are you expecting developers to invest so much money? So WeChat doesn't start with an umbrella app with apps on it. It starts with business pages, which are kind of like a Facebook business page within WeChat that can message users. It's kind of like a storefront. So it starts with things that are a lot simpler. What I want to think about here is, for me, that platform strategy is a big aspect of what WeChat does. When you're thinking about how does Facebook succeed, how does Facebook turn itself into a super app, what they've done is they've taken their traffic and then they've sold it via ads. They just take that traffic and they lead it elsewhere, and then you're going to do your transaction elsewhere. The monetary value is going to happen off the Facebook platform generally, and it's that ad that's going to take you there. Where WeChat, it's a closed loop is what we call it in Chinese. It's like they call it a 闭环, which means like 封闭 is closed, and then 环 means a loop or like a ring. So then you advertise in WeChat, you go to the mini program of the business, you transact, then you come back, and then you get like a receipt all within WeChat. How would others succeed is, for me, is that platform strategy. Is if I'm Facebook, I'm thinking of how do I bring other players on to interact with my users in intelligent ways.
In the Tencent journey, to some extent, the mini programs are almost an end for me, because when you look at the Talkbox story that we talked about also, up to that point, maybe there was a sense, it's like we need to do everything. We need to be the best at everything. And at some point, then there's a realization that the whole universe is just too big. And if you want to dominate, you need to either scale to cover the whole universe, or you need to find a way to have sufficient influence and enable others to play on your terms and maybe also with your money. And that's kind of where the story changed a bit to investing in others that were building interesting stuff like the mobilities, the Didis of this world, so the Matrons, which was the group buying site that turned into meal delivery. I think the philosophical change happened first in changing how you operate in this overall ecosystem that is China. And the mini program was the last manifestation of actually saying, we actually have the platform. The mini program decentralizes innovation, right? That's kind of what everybody tries to do with blockchain, etc.
Totally.
We have here the WeChat platform. We give you the tools to innovate on our platform. Of course, we're taking a cut, etc. But Tencent is maybe even more so than Alibaba, certainly one of the biggest investors in Southeast Asia, and by far the biggest investor in games globally. So that's how this story evolved from my side of it.
You saying decentralized innovation, that's just something that's spoken so commonly at Tencent. It's called 去中心化, which 中心化 just means centralization, then 去 means like D. Yeah, so the idea is that it's all about, in I did marketing and partnerships, we always had to be really careful because every partner goes, we want to be listed at the top. And then you go, but that would centralize the innovation. That would put you above other partners. We want to help you make good content, but we don't want to unfairly place you. It's just like the classic search engine optimization dilemma. You see mini program, and that's all about the decentralization of innovation and of everything. It's just trying to allow anyone to make things. More recently, where I've seen WeChat going is they really started losing this is just kind of WeChat specific, but they've really started losing their eyeballs. WeChat dominated entertainment, they dominated news, and both of those have been eaten up by ByteDance. And so they're trying to delve back into that. They still dominate social and communication, and they just have no risk of not dominating that area in China. WeChat became the number one news source for a while in China. And then it was one of the number one, I don't know the term in English. It's like 打发时间 in Chinese. It's like something like time wasting. It's like just wasting time on your phone, which I kind of put into entertainment, but sometimes it's not the exact same. It's more passive than entertainment. And TikTok really nails that category of people just kind of the doom scroll, just kind of scrolling, and they just want to waste some time. They're not selecting a YouTube video to watch or playing it or actively playing a game. They're just doom scrolling and just kind of watching all these videos. So those two categories, ByteDance really kind of dominated. And then that's when WeChat more recently has kind of moved into channels. They've kind of made their own short videos. They've done these other innovations.
We try to stay out a bit of the politics, but clearly if you look at what happened in this overall space, payments, basically since 2017 or 18, and maybe over the last 2 years, a bit more on entertainment as well. So if a large part of your business is gaming, but then kids based on their age are limited to X number of hours of gaming per week, that must have an impact. So on all of this, by any means, Tencent compared to Alibaba was always seen as the more compliant or more accommodating to the government giant. And still they kind of got penalized a bit. I think 2 weeks ago, you saw the first games approved, and it was like one game Tencent got approved and another game they got a monetization license for, which is also not a whole lot when you have a stable of so many games and game developers. It's like the crystal ball, right? It's the hardest question to answer, but you obviously have it on a solid background. How do you see that evolving ultimately, not only for Tencent, but Alibaba and ByteDance as well?
Totally. Even a kind of precursor question to that is, and a question I would commonly receive when I was at WeChat and kind of any super app, is then how do you make money? And how does Tencent make money? How does WeChat make money? I know when I worked there and I talking to partners, they go, wait, so how does this company actually make money? I'm a bit confused. With Facebook, it's really clear. It's ads. With Alibaba, it's really clear. It's platform fees, kind of transaction fees. But with WeChat and with Tencent, it's less clear. Tencent's always kind of played around with different models. Tencent kind of early on decided that Chinese weren't going to be okay with a lot of advertisements and that they would scare away users, especially because there was so low copyright control in the beginning, that they go, if we have ads, another Chinese competitor is going to copy everything we do and just put it up with no ads, and then we'll just lose users. So there were never really enough legal walls of copying to enable Tencent to do ads. So what's kind of nice about that is they never really got addicted to that model, whereas Facebook, as you kind of pointed out, is very addicted to ads and they kind of can't get off of it. And I feel like if Facebook wants to innovate, they're just going to need to do a shoot off thing that isn't ads dependent, or they have to kind of buy a company at this point. But how WeChat was originally making money, a lot of it is in gaming. They have all the users, they're all there. And then it's actually kind of in gaming, but then it's also in their investment. And I think this is Tencent and WeChat's super app secret strategy, is that anything that Tencent invests in, and pretty much most games that they come out with, are doomed to succeed because they just connect it to WeChat's 1.2 billion users, and they put it up within the WeChat wallet, or they allow them to connect to each other in a game. They allow them to more easily play with each other. It's just going to be so successful so quickly. When you play some of WeChat game or some of Tencent's games like Honor of the Kings, which I think made a combined $20 billion over the past 6 years, and it kind of came out while I was in WeChat. It's a 5-on-5 MOBA. It's a 5-on-5 battle game, and so you play with friends. And when you open it, you can go see what WeChat friends are online, and you can play with them. And I've played with my head of legal. When I was at WeChat, I've played with all these other people in my company because it's just so easy, because everyone's going to be on WeChat all the time, and it's so easy to invite them. And Tencent tries to invest in these games that are like 5 to 20 minutes, like a quick social interaction. It's all around that social aspect. Those games just made billions of dollars because it was made more successful sitting on the back of Tencent's social empire. That's one aspect. Another kind of one that is a little more clear is their advertisements. Yes, they actually only allow 2 ads on WeChat Moments a day. So very few, but those ads are really expensive because they have a huge interaction rate. And then, like I said, it's closed loop. You put up your ad, you buy within the platform. The ROI measurement is incredible. Like with Facebook, you can do click-through rate. You don't actually know who buys it, and you just get all of these random interactions. I just published my book, right? Like 2 months ago, I bought $20 of Twitter ads. I think I got like 1,000 exposures. I think I got 1 like from 10,000 exposures. So I was like, I just spent $20 to get 1 like and a follower. I was like, wow, that ROI is absolutely garbage. And the content that I had promoted was Tim Draper saying this book is terrific, and he's like Elon Musk of VCs in Silicon Valley. I think it was really good content, like with his picture on it, and he had approved it and everything. He said I could share, and I got 1 like, 1 follower from $20. That ROI is horrible, but on WeChat you can really measure all of it. You can measure when someone buys it, and then when they follow your account, you can measure when they refer. They see the ad, they buy, and then they refer to a friend, and then that person buys it. So second tier, and then third tier, fourth tier, you can kind of follow all along. So it makes those advertisements incredibly valuable. And then, but that I think the real secret for me is the investment strategy. This is the one that I'm not sure is going to be around for long because of these because of this increased regulation and monopoly crackdown. But again, the games were doomed to succeed in a way if they had that huge social element. Now you have Tencent buys. They bought something. They invested in JD Health. They invested in JD Health. They also invested in something called it was called WeDoctor, like WeChat Doctor, WeDoctor. They invested in this telehealth company worth about $200-300 million. It works mostly on WeChat. They invest a decent amount of money in it. Then they do M&A investment. Then they give them kind of their product managers to help them optimize for WeChat. And then they're probably going to be helping them be optimized everywhere within WeChat. And then you bet it's going to be kind of, maybe there's going to be a little bit of optimization on some of the search results, and there's a lot of different search places within WeChat, not just the one bar. There's all these different places you can search. And then sure enough, in 2 to 3 years, they've invested, let's say, $50 million at a value of $300 million. And that's a 1/6 of the company. In 2 or 3 years, WeDoctor was already worth about $5 billion US. So you don't see that on the revenue chart, but Tencent's M&A is insane. They're already really good. They're already really good at investing. Tencent's M&A is like their secret weapon. They're already really good at investing, but then they just make their companies succeed as well. Because they invested in Riot Games when it was $100 million. Now that company's like $80 billion or something. So not only are they good investments, but then a lot of the stuff they do in China is it would just be my greatest fear as a startup to have my competitor be invested by Alibaba or Tencent, and then not have once they get invested, you either get invested by the other player or you're completely out. I think that's kind of been a big secret to the super app success, more of a secret to their monetization rather than their success, because their success is clear. The question is, how do they make money off of it? That's for me been an interesting and telling one.
Still so many good stories that we could cover. You described some of the partners you worked with in China in the book, which included Starbucks. So there's slots in there in the Starbucks story. But at the same time, people should buy the book if they want to know more. So it was fantastic, Kevin. Really appreciate you taking the time. We all enjoyed this, and our thanks for that.
Thank you.